Greetings and welcome to Freedom News, or FrihetsNytt as we say in Swedish. My name is Victor Eriksson, the editor-in-chief, and today I'm speaking English because we have a very esteemed guest with us here today. It's none other than Mr. Zoltán Kovács, international spokesman for the Hungarian government, as well as State Secretary for Public Relations and Diplomacy. Üdvözlöm, Mr. Kovács. It's a very great pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me today.
This interview will focus a lot on the upcoming European elections, but we will also talk about certain topics like NATO that is of big interest to our listeners and our viewers. But before we get started, Mr. Kovács, I would like you to give a quick introduction of who you are.
You rightly stated my recent status. I'm State Secretary Zoltán Kovács. I'm working with the government for the past 14 years. Mostly in the field of communications right from the very beginning. And one of my primary assignments has always been coping with international media in a fairly hostile environment towards Mr. Orbán's government and, if you like, towards Hungary. So the past couple of years, attacks and charges on and against Hungary and Hungarian politics is not a novelty for us. So we can live with that and we can cope with that. And very obviously, we do have our own approach and narrative about how we see the world around us, how we approach the problems that exist in Hungary, in Europe, how we would like to address them, and very obviously how we go for them around and among all the circumstances actually that are surrounding us. Recently, I'm also charged with organizing and preparing for the Hungarian presidency of the European Council. So we are very much looking forward towards the second half of this year when Hungary is going to run the presidency.
And it will all start with the European elections this summer. What are the aims of the Hungarian government apart from this presidentship?
I believe, if you like, the proverb, the slogan you've already heard from the Prime Minister is describing everything and all, and that is we need change in Brussels. We see a European bureaucracy, we see European institutions who start to deviate from their original assignments and original goals, and the roles actually that has been not simply signed, but are fixed by the treaty. So the Commission and the European Parliament are not sovereign bodies and not decision makers. They are to execute the decisions and discussions decided by the European Council. But we see just the opposite. Both the Commission and especially the European Parliament recently has started to live their own lives, disregarding the treaty and the legal framework which has been assigned to them. And very obviously, we have a very special approach to many things happening in Europe, not only and not, first of all, not because what these institutions have done against the Hungarian government for the past 14 years, but for these elements of principle I mentioned to you. We have a treaty. The treaty is perfectly clear about the confines of the institution's competences and clear about that sovereignty lays with the nation states of the European Union. So change is needed because the institutions are deviating from the principles of European cooperation, but also needed because, or in the light of the recent developments in European politics and decision-making, with a special regard to COVID, a special regard to the economic challenges Europe is facing, with a special regard to what agriculture is facing recently, actually, and the ideological approach on behalf of the Parliament and Commission towards addressing the problems of the farmers. And very obviously, and with a special regard to the war that is raging in Ukraine, in which, and the failed sanction policies on behalf of the Commission and the European institutions, which clearly showed us that it's a dead end towards which Europe is heading for the moment.
Considering all these constant attacks that the European Union commit against Hungary and try to force you to accept a lot more migrants, criticizing you for your stance on LGBT questions. Why do you choose to remain in the Union instead of leaving it and creating something new instead that respects the sovereignty of the nation state?
For an obvious reason, because there are so many other people and a silent, probably majority by now, actually, of Europeans who basically believe the same way or opine the same way. If you put this question properly to Europeans, including Swedish people, you would find, and that's what we do actually in the background, for the past 5 consecutive years, we have a yearly big European survey, a poll, in which we put different kinds of questions, including on the war, on, say, illegal migration, on other institution-related and sovereignty-related issues. And not only the Hungarian, but all European nations are clear about the original sense of the European Union. So instead of, as a matter of fact, in brackets, we have never considered actually leaving the European Union, as far as I'm attending meetings and government meetings and so on the highest political level. Instead, we have chosen a different way, and that is to choose the trajectory of the European institutions and European cooperation back to where it belongs, and that is an honest, fair cooperation based on the mutual respect of nations. And as you rightly suggested, and I would like to recall your memories actually, that during the first Hungarian presidency back in 2011, our slogan was Strong Europe. So that sense, that message is still out there. We would like to have a strong Europe, but our conviction is that strong Europe is only possible through the cooperation of strong nations.
And what is the Hungarian government's stance on this new migration treaty that will be voted in the parliament in April?
I believe we are not selling any unknown merchandise here. You've seen the Hungarian government's attitude right from the very beginning, from 2010 to the issue, and very specifically and very strongly since 2015, since the beginning of the migration crisis. We all know that what happened back in 2015 was just the tip of the iceberg, because it's an ongoing decade-long process, actually, that instead of stopping illegal migration at the borders of Europe, European institutions and many so-called human rights groups and the political left in Europe is managing migration, and that is, they are letting it happen. For obvious considerations, because if it's about demography, if it's about population issues, they do have a program, a visible program of refreshing Europe's population by the means of illegal migration. We believe that's a very dangerous process. It's against not simply member state cultures, but against the cultural environment in which Europe was conceived and in which it was and it is flourishing. And very obviously, the very presence of illegality itself is a problem. So they praise about the rule of law, but Europe and certainly the institutions are not even following the basic rules of migration at the borders of the European Union. So we have had, and we still have, a first-hand experience about illegal migrants entering the European Union without asking and without any permission. And we are going to resist any kind of decision that is trying to convince us, or rather force us into a new system in which a false sense of solidarity is being enforced on everyone. Illegal migration is bad. It's as simple as that. It's not in the interests of not only Hungary, but neither of the European Union as a whole and any other country. As with all due respect, we see the recent reactions on behalf of the reigning Swedish government, which has announced that no, they are not going to participate in the distribution of migrants. Rather, they pay for the fine. But this is sorry for the sentence and for the use of language. This is a stupid. This is a stupid system, which is not handling and not solving the problem. It is basically postponing and providing for a pseudo treatment for the very existential threat illegal migration is presenting to Europe.
No need to apologize, Mr. Kovács. We are quite united in that opinion, you and I. But how does the Hungarian government plan to oppose these plans and the agenda of the European Union to force different nations to accept migrants?
Look, migration itself is a member state sovereignty issue. So it is the Hungarian government's sovereign right to decide who is stepping on Hungarian soil, full stop, and that we are going to preserve at all costs.
But let's say that we are able to stop this flood of illegal migrants coming to Europe. We will still have a lot of problem with groups already being in the EU. For example, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Sweden. How do you think that one should handle the problem with these groups already in Europe?
Look, this is one of the primary reasons actually we reject illegal migration. We all know that there are hundreds of thousands of aliens, if you use the terminology, say, of the US State Department or the US agencies, who have no legal foundation to be in Europe. And indeed, this is a major problem. So that is basically betraying the European institutions, the European Commission's attitude towards illegal migration. They don't even intend to return those who are illegally in Europe and have a false pretension actually to be in Europe. And that's the real problem. Take a look at Germany, take a look at France. Probably that's the very same actually with Sweden. Large groups, hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people are in your countries that cannot be returned actually to their countries or countries of origins for obvious reasons. First, we don't really know where they are coming from. They have false identities. It's very difficult actually to establish real identities. And very obviously, those countries which are releasing migrants to this global migration process are not taking back these people to their own countries. So it's an issue that cannot be solved actually, not even by forcible means. So we see attempts on behalf of the UK and others to force the return of these people. It will not be solved, I can tell you. That's the very nature of the problem they have helped to create.
Well, there are a lot of people who hope that there will be a solution to that, and there will be a possibility to get these people to migrate either to their home countries or to a third country outside of Europe. But let's move on to another question concerning the fight against globalism. Mr. Orban spoke at the latest on the Heritage Foundation in Florida that the real struggle is between globalists and those that value the sovereignty of the nation. How should all these people, these forces, these parties that oppose globalism and want the nation state to remain sovereign, how should they work together at the best possible way?
2 years ago, to put it short and simple, the Prime Minister has talked about this at the first Hungarian CPAC. And I believe for conservatives, sovereigntists, for those who believe in the future of the nation state and the nation's sovereignty, it has always been more difficult to find common ground for cooperation than for the internationalist groups, which the political left has always been. So instead of trying to find universal issues and causes by which, say, the political left is uniting, the path for the conservatives should be a different one. And that is, we don't believe that for a Swede or a Hungarian, for a Frenchman and an Italian, all things are going to appear and look alike for obvious reasons: geographic location, sociological differences, institutional differences, and so on. So differences are always going to be there, not to talk about patriotism and the love of our countries. But very certainly there are some common issues by which we can work together. The rejection of illegal migration, family values, the traditional family we are talking about, some economic elements of cooperation, the very principle of mutual respect, and that is accept the will of those people actually who elect a government and who assign responsibilities and mandates for governments in different countries, respect the people's decision, and cooperate alongside these recognitions and these common issues instead of trying to unite by something universal. And I think that's the future for conservatives around the globe, to work together, find the common issues, find the common ground, and cooperate.
it's not only the European Union that is constantly attacking Hungary and the policies of the Hungarian government. We have also have globalists like the poster boy for the globalist movement, George Soros, that tries to undermine everything you do. How have you been dealing with him these last years, and what is his influence in Hungary today? And what is the best way to counter the attempts to try to infiltrate the society by people like Mr. Soros?
But we and you shouldn't be naive about this, because it is, as you rightly suggested, this is a global influence they've been building for the past couple of decades. And this is not a 10, 15 years old project. It's been going on for the past 30, 40 years by now. We can call it globalist, but certainly it has a very different approach to national sovereignty, to responsibility, to democracy itself, because it has nothing to do with democracy. In the name of democracy and civil society, they are basically hijacking these institutions and these phenomena. Those NGOs and the kind of civil society the Soros empire is referring to has nothing to do with democracy. It is not grassroots, it is not bottom up, but it's being created from above. It is being financed by mostly foreign money around the globe. And very obviously, they are serving interests that are not rooted in the national governments or the national societies. And this is the biggest danger, actually, you have to cope with. And I've mentioned naivety. It's been a very successful effort on behalf of George Soros and like-minded financiers for these groups, because they decided that it's not only civil society, but public administration and other international institutions that have been basically occupied by these forces. They serve as reference points to each other. They rest on each other. They help each other actually in preparing for decisions and going for decisions. So the only method you can use actually is that you talk about this issue in a very honest manner, basically portray them as they are, and show the alternative. And that is how political communities in nation states should be relying on their own efforts, their own resources, and all decision-making in face of an interest that is coming from abroad most of the time. It is indeed the case, actually, in Hungary that they are trying to interfere in our elections, but I have no doubt that it is happening on an industrial basis all around the globe, basically, as we speak. So they find the ways and means of interfering into democratic decision-making processes. To tell you one example, it is very telling that in this financial period of the European Union, the support for NGOs being basically tripled. And the support and financial assistance going to NGOs is basically serving a non-democratic goal, and that is how to help the work of the Commission, which is a political commission by now, reinforce and help to reinforce issues and developments and progresses that has nothing to do with democracy, and mostly are based on an ideological perception of the globe. And I believe one recent example is what we see regarding the so-called green transition and the laws regarding agricultural production and farming.
Speaking about this green transition and the farmers, how has this recent farmers' protest in Europe affected Hungary, and how will they affect the policies that you intend to promote in the European Parliament?
As you see, there is a Europe-wide reawakening of farmers who politically usually are supporting the domestic parties, and that is the sovereigntists, the conservative parties most of the time. And that reawakening is happening rightly. And that is, they have realized what we've been talking about for a longer period of time, and that is, if it's about the changing climate in Europe or the global phenomenon of a changing climate, which obviously is happening, but you have to be very careful when addressing it and talking about human responsibility and the global environment in which it's happening. Europe is giving only 10% or less than 10% of the greenhouse gases actually, compared to China, the United States, and other parts of the globe. So you can imagine the impact Europe is going to have. So sacrificing Europe's agricultural production on the altar of the so-called green ideological political movement would be the biggest mistake Europe could ever commit, especially in the face of reality. And that is, while it is an over-regulating ideological approach to agricultural production in Europe, it is letting in production from, as a matter of fact, recently from Ukraine and all other parts of the globe without, well, basically restriction and without looking into the background and how that production is happening. So it's not simply about the ideology behind green political movements, but also it's about the competitiveness of the European economy, the European agriculture, which should be scrutinized here when making decisions like that. We have always suggested that, yes, indeed, there is a need for a common European agricultural policy and stepping up against issues and elements actually that are ruining or harming the competitiveness of Europe. But that should be done in the name of common sense instead of any kind of ideology.
We shall move on from the European Union to questions concerning NATO, especially now that Sweden is now more a member of this military alliance. Hungary was the last country to accept Sweden as a member, and we were facing a lot of opposition before that. A lot of our readers and listeners are very curious as to why Fidesz changed their stance and supported Sweden joining NATO and voted in support of that. What changed the mind? Changed the stake?
Well, make no mistake, we have always supported Sweden's joining of NATO. The very basic principle for NATO is very simple, and that is, if a nation is willing and wanting to join NATO and it is fulfilling all the criteria, the alliance and the member states of the alliance should be welcoming. And I believe the Hungarian government's stance on that was very clear right from the very beginning. And if you wanted to look for any kind of conspiracy and second thought, we have never sold any kind of, again, unknown merchandise here. The Hungarian stance was very clear. Yes, indeed, NATO is a military alliance, and most things depend on the honest and innate attempt on behalf of a nation to join NATO, and that is the will of the given nation and country to join. But at the same time, you also have to keep in mind, and that was coming on Hungary from many angles, that besides being a military alliance, it is indeed based on common values. And when your alliance and cooperation is based on common values, it also means that you die for each other. So when you are providing military assistance and you have to fight for each other, that means that that kind of devotion and the cooperation should be well-founded, based on mutual respect and the admission and the acknowledgement that we have differences, but at the same time we go and in some certain environment, we fight for the very same goals. And with all due respect, what we've seen coming from many Swedish outlets, media outlets, many Swedish politicians in parliament. As a matter of fact, the previous government was very loud on those criticisms, which were coming from political taste rather than based on fact on the ground. And I think when we have called this ideological approach to blaming and talking about Hungary in a disrespectful manner, we really meant it. And I think the recent visit of your prime minister helped a lot actually to help handle these issues. And I can tell you, I was there, that meeting was respectful, based on mutual respect of differences. And this is what we expect from an ally, actually, whom we tie our bonds even closer than previously. So again, everything has an explanation. It's a very simple explanation. We respect how the Swedish state, how the Swedish parliament work, how you opine, but don't mix this up, political differences of political opinion and taste with respect towards each other.
But what is your opinion or impression that the future looks like for NATO, considering the statements from Donald Trump, Emmanuel Macron wanting to send troops into Ukraine, while Turkey, Hungary, and Slovakia wants to maintain a normal relation with Russia? How are these different wills? How will they be able to keep the alliance together?
But keeping a normal relations obviously have conditions, and that is we need peace as soon as possible, and all warlike activities should be stopped. Negotiations based on mutual respect and recognition of differences should be the basis for that. But coming back to NATO, yes, indeed, NATO is facing these kind of challenges because the first issue is on which Hungary is performing well, and as I believe, and as we see, Sweden has always performed well, is how to fulfill the necessary criteria for NATO membership. And I believe what Mr. Trump is saying, and that is that the US is not ready and wouldn't like to pay for other security by its own money and by its own blood, is something you all have to respect. So NATO is an alliance, as I suggested, that should be based on mutual respect, but also should be based on the mutual recognition of the necessary equipment, financing, and other elements of NATO membership. On that, Europe is not, and Europe was not performing very well for the past 2 decades. And that is most European member states have basically disregarded these compulsory elements of NATO membership. And it's high time to wake up and fulfill that. I believe Hungary's showing it can be regarded, if not a role model, but definitely is trying to do its best actually to close the gap and fulfill the obligations that are coming with NATO membership. NATO means that, well, I would rather put it that way, the essence of NATO, that NATO is us. So NATO is not the United States. The NATO is not France. NATO is not the big states. It's also the smaller states, actually. So you have to fulfill your obligations, and yet you have to do everything for your own security first, and then look for the possible and necessary cooperation with your partners.
One final question for this interview, and it's a little bit more personal. Considering all these constant attacks by the Swedish establishment, as you mentioned, both the outlets, the media, and the politicians accusing the Hungarian state of not being a proper democracy, what is your most personal opinion of the Swedish democracy?
If you like, on the personal side, I can live with that, actually. So I see how politics is becoming ever more ideological, especially on the political left, and how the political left is trying to hijack certain terms, norms, principles, and ideas, actually, regarding democracy, rule of law, and so on. It is my work for the past 14 years to live with that. And since we know here in Hungary that it has nothing to do with reality, I mean, those false charges and claims against Hungary, we can live with that. But at the same time, you have to call attention to the very fact that if these kind of ideological attacks are going to overrule common sense, that will not help cooperation between member states. This is what we've seen about the NATO partnership and joining the NATO on behalf of Sweden. And with all due respect, we never do that with other nations. So I'm not going to tell you what I honestly think about. I do have a very strong opinion about these opinions, actually, that were coming on us, especially from the political left in Sweden. And not only about the opinion, because I have personally met some of these representatives back through the years during the past decade. Again, I can accept that they have an opinion like that, but between states and nations, opinion cannot overrule and overcome reality. And the order, how to say, the very first rule, if you like, between the contact or in the contact and the cooperation of nations, and that is respect. whatever the will of a given people is, whoever your government is, you always have to respect the other people who are on the other side, because luck is going to change. I mean, political luck is going to change. There can be a different government. You can have a proper or more civilized conversation. I think these rules cannot be overwritten in politics. If you rely on them, it is always possible to talk to each other.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovács, for taking the time to answer these questions and giving very good answers to them as well.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Is there a final message or something final that you want to tell the Swedish audience? Most people who are watching this will mostly be more, I would say, positive or friendly towards Hungary compared to the more mainstream outlets.
Thank you for the help when it is coming towards Hungary through social media and other channels. And keep it in mind that it is always possible to change the world around you if you rely on your own rights, and that is the right to express your opinion, to right to vote, and very often to organize yourself. And as we have discussed it during the conversation, it's high time that we have some kind of change in Brussels. The sooner it comes, the better it is for Europe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovács. I wish you the best of luck in the European elections, and also a very pleasant start on the European presidency as well. There are a lot of people who are looking forward to that time. So with all that, I can just say köszönöm, and thank you for taking the time with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.